If you're wondering why, if you're scrolling on social media, you may have seen people whose profile pictures are purpled out. There's simply just either purple circles or purple pictures. It's part of a broader campaign by Women for Change, who's calling for a national shutdown next Friday on the 21st of November. It's beyond just making your profile picture purple. Women for Change is calling for a national shutdown, no work, particularly women, calling on women, but also all South Africans to withdraw labor on that day to show women's economic impact on the South African economy, calling for no spending, a complete economic boycott for one day. There's also calls for a 15-minute national standstill at 12 noon to lie down or to stand on a public street in solidarity for 15 minutes in honor of the 15 women murdered daily in South Africa, primarily by people that they know and that they love. The South African Medical Research Council says that 60% of women are killed by intimate partners. But Women for Change is calling for a national disaster to be declared. A national disaster has all sorts of impacts legally, financially, how budgets are set and distributed. But what would it mean? How is the National Disaster Act? Does it speak to issues around which are largely social crime? Let me speak now to Merlize Jogiat, who is with Women for Change. Good morning, Merlize. Really appreciate your time. The National Disaster Management Centre has already rejected a petition by Women for Change to have gender-based violence declared legally a national disaster in South Africa. But maybe we'll start with defining what a national disaster would pertain to. What practically would declaring GBV and femicide a national disaster entail under the Disaster Management Act?
Thank you for having me. Well, if you remember what happened in COVID-19 when the act was then, when they kind of delivered the act, for a lack of a better word, things changed immediately, right? Finances were opened, resources were released just to take care of the problem immediately. I think South Africa doesn't take gender-based violence half as seriously as they did COVID, and we have much more women dying because of gender-based violence. When those resources are opened, we can actually mitigate the problem from a legal standpoint in the police stations, from in the court system. We can take care of the deep issues that are rooted in the reason why gender-based violence and femicide is so, how can I say, big in the country at the moment.
We already have other interventions, national plans against disaster management. How would declaring the state of disaster would be different from any of the other action plans?
The other action plans have not been implemented. I think South Africa has a big implementation problem. We are promised a ton of things. The NSP was promised, we had the 90-day blitz. But up until this very moment, we have no reporting on how that was actually implemented. In one of our earlier interviews, the minister said that they have released funds to other organizations and also done training in the police system. But up until this day, we have no proof of that. We don't even know where those funds went. And every day we are dealing with thousands of cases coming through our DMs, personally telling us that there's no police training. Women are being sent home from the police, telling them that whatever they're dealing with is a family matter. We just see this growing and growing every day. But all of the things we've been told have been put in place. We're not seeing any evidence of that on the ground.
Look, my personal belief is that gender-based violence is of disaster proportions in South Africa, among the highest globally. I mentioned the 2024 Medical Research Council report that there are. The 2024 report said 7 women are murdered daily. More recent reports say up to 15 women are murdered daily, but 60% of those are by intimate partners.
Mm.
how would a increased policing response, the concept of there can't be police in people's homes, and if people are attacked, violence is perpetrated against by people that they live with, people that they know, people that they maybe even love.
Mm.
How do we police with national intervention of police into what happens behind closed doors? We already have legislation that's been promulgated that says, well, if you know of a neighbor, for example, who is the victim of
Mm.
gender-based violence, you are compelled. In fact, you could be held criminally liable if you knew of it, but you didn't report. But how do we police what's essentially a social phenomenon brought up by this air of a patriarchal society in South Africa,
Mm.
the entitlement of men to women, that even children, girls and women, but people that they generally know and maybe even love?
Mm. I think there are two things we need to look at here. Number one, South Africa is one of the countries that have the highest amount of police officers. That is problematic if we are not having cases opened. We need to ask what's wrong in those police stations that prevent people from opening cases in the first place. And then the second thing is it's education. We have the education available to understand how abuse works, how these victims end up being murdered by their intimate partners. So the education is not being taught. We're giving very general information around gender-based violence when we have studies on the psychology behind it that should actually be implemented from a school-going level. There seems to be resistance in understanding what that education looks like, and again, an implementation problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I totally agree in that it takes maybe even a generational mindset that
Mm.
starts with of simply how men are raised to raise their sons. But firstly, we have to deal with the factor that 60% of children in South Africa are registered with only one parent, and that's primarily the mother. So we also
Mm.
have to work on the issue of positive male involvement in the lives of
Mm-hmm.
particularly young boys before they even
Mm.
get to school. And then we implement a school curriculum. We implement the PSAs on television. We implement a society based change when it comes to cutting down patriarchy in South Africa,
Mm.
and then we
Mm.
change a system. But I also appreciate we need the immediate interventions as well. We need a more empathetic police service when a victim does come to a police station to open up
Mm-hmm.
a complaint. We need reactive courts. We need safe spaces. So I think we have to eat bubblegum and walk at the same time here. Merlize?
Yeah, pretty much. This is not, I mean, calling this a national disaster or rather will not be an overnight change.
Yeah.
Nothing is. We have been sitting with this problem for many years. We have to take this one step at a time, but we need to look at the most important issues that we can tackle immediately. And I think when we look at the policing system, how bail conditions are not actually being implemented the way that they were intended to, and how the judicial system handles any abuse case. Those, I think, are the crux of the matter, because victims are less likely to open up cases because they know how the treatment is going to be. They're traumatized within the police station and even more in the court system. We know countless women who have lost their children to the court system because their abusers were the one who were listened to. We really need to uproot the causes for this. And I think it's also very culturally rooted, like you were talking to patriarchy. The judicial system specifically is very patriarchal. Women are not listened to. I coach people who go through this and have to teach them how to emotionally regulate themselves in a courtroom so that they don't look like they are the problem. There's a deep, deep issue there. And I think those are the things that can be tackled almost immediately.
Yeah. And I've read and I've watched the videos online, and I've been looking at the tweets and saying, see, this is a government who doesn't care about gender-based violence because it won't declare a national state of disaster. But isn't it because the national state of disaster is couched in a legal term? It's governed by legislation that has been promulgated. The we can very much argue that there are systems that can be changed, that there's money that can be unlocked, but how do you declare a national disaster on what is a social phenomenon?
You see, the thing is, a national disaster, like I said, would be for the immediate changes. And obviously, there may have to be policy shifts around this and all of that. But we need to actually start having that conversation. We feel like every time we brought this to the fore, it's been like, no, this can't happen, this can't happen. But we're not actually being told really why that is. Because if you look at what actually a national disaster is, gender-based violence actually falls within the criteria. So the explanations have been bare minimum, like we're used to with the government. As long as they can keep you from at arm's length, we're not supposed to ask any more questions. The meeting that we're going in today, of course, we're going to ask those questions because we need to have a deeper understanding for why they keep saying it can't happen, right? But like I said, it will be a twofold thing. We need the immediate changes and then a long-term solution that will be put in place. And then we need to keep holding people accountable to make sure that implementation is actually taking place, as opposed to us being told what happened and having no evidence for it.
Merlize Jogiat, really appreciate your time. Woman for Change. Thanks so much for joining us here on Good Morning Cape Town.